intertwining issues of racism and casteism in India remain both deeply entrenched and contentious. While debates about race and caste in India date back centuries, they often remain confined to intellectual exercises, largely overlooking the lived experiences of marginalized groups. The controversy surrounding the exclusion of caste from the agenda of the 2001 World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia and Related Intolerance, WCAR, held in Durban, South Africa, illustrates this. Dalit organisations sought to have caste-based discrimination recognised as a form of racism, but the Indian state and elite scholars staunchly resisted this assertion, emphasising that caste and race were fundamentally different concepts. At the heart of this debate is the notion that casteism, like racism, is rooted in discrimination. Both systems trace lineage, skin colour, social hierarchy, and other markers to determine who is privileged and who is marginalised. An independent researcher has pointed out that racial discrimination, especially as it manifests against people from northeast India, is a violation of human rights and should not be miscategorized.
It just happened to me this morning as well as I was coming out for college. You know, they said chinky, chinky, chinky.
They would say tum log, which means you people, you come over here and then you create such nuisance and all that.
Despite this, Indian scholars and the government continue to reject the idea that caste violence is comparable to racism. This rejection is exemplified by eminent Indian sociologist André Bataille, who argued that race is a European concept foreign to India. He maintained that caste was an indigenous social system that could not be compared with race-based violence or discrimination in other parts of the world. In Bataille's view, any attempt to equate the two was scientifically nonsensical, and using race as a framework to discuss caste violence was both dangerous and irresponsible. He suggested that those who draw such parallels might in fact be using race as a weapon to further their own agendas. While Bataille's arguments find resonance among some, critics assert that denying the overlap between caste and race erases the lived experiences of the Dalit community. For Dalits, caste-based violence feels like a racial attack, deeply rooted in historical exclusion and systemic oppression. The Dalit experience, as Kanabiran notes, is fundamentally about resisting all forms of descent-based discrimination, whether labelled as caste or race.
As you are aware of, many villages, they don't have a toilet facility, so they are using the public toilets. And this public toilets, cleaning and everything, still the lower caste people are doing. And they have their separate colonies. They have separate houses, which is not along with the normal. So if every upper caste people are inside the city, these people are staying outside the city. So even still nowadays in most of the village areas, these people, they have their colonies separate.
The 2001 debate in India surrounding the caste-race comparison highlighted a troubling trend in Indian academia and politics. Dalit experiences of caste violence were relegated to mere theoretical topics, discussed and dismissed by intellectuals without any meaningful engagement with the realities of Dalit oppression. Indian elites, buoyed by academic jargon and government support, rejected the call to recognise caste-based violence as racial discrimination. This debate underscored how disciplines such as sociology and anthropology, far from decolonising knowledge, often align themselves with state power to perpetuate systems of exclusion and discrimination. Dipankar Gupta, another Indian sociologist, argued that caste identities are central to public life and politics in India. He dismissed the idea that caste and race could be equated, calling it a self-defeating project. Since 2001, however, there have been several critical developments in how racism is understood in India, especially concerning issues of citizenship, militarization, and migration. For example, terms like racial Indianization have emerged, signifying how race is embedded within the caste system. Drawing comparisons between the experiences of Dalits in India and African Americans in the United States. An independent researcher emphasized the segregation and social exclusion that Dalits face in Indian society. Much like African Americans, who were historically forced to live in segregated neighborhoods and denied basic rights, Dalits are often relegated to living outside the boundaries of villages, excluded from communal spaces like temples and water sources, and subjected to various indignities. These acts of exclusion and violence are not random, but operate on a system of impunity, where upper caste perpetrators face little to no consequences for their actions. It is further highlighted how caste impunity manifests in India, where upper caste men routinely perpetrate sexual violence and brutality against Dalit women with little fear of legal repercussions. This culture of caste-based violence reinforces both the caste-class divide and gender hierarchies. For Geetha, the persistence of caste violence in everyday life reveals how caste practices are ingrained in the very fabric of Indian culture, permeating everything from labor practices to governance. The caste ethos that shapes Indian society is evident even in government initiatives like the Swachh Bharat Clean India mission. Tel Tumda, an independent researcher, argues that such cleanliness drives are inherently casteist, as they rely on the labour of Dalit people to maintain the illusion of cleanliness. He asserts that India cannot truly be clean without first eradicating the caste system, which upholds the labour and lives of Dalits as unclean or impure. Gopal Guru, a researcher, underscores this point, emphasising how everyday activities, like buying food or walking in the market, reinforce caste hierarchies and marginalisation. The work that Dalits perform, sweeping, scavenging, picking up trash, is not only devalued, but is also imbued with a sense of filth and pollution based on upper caste notions of purity. This casteist trope persists in Indian society, making Dalits synonymous with uncleanliness and impurity, a perception that extends even to people from northeast India. One of the most visible and pervasive ways in which caste and racism intersect in India is through food. Northeastern migrants in metropolitan cities are often labelled as dirty or unclean due to their food habits, reinforcing caste-based notions of contamination. The strong smells of masalas and fermented foods, which are common in northeastern cuisines, are used as markers of filth, leading to conflicts over cooking and eating in shared spaces such as hostels or housing societies. This perception of dirty food extends from educational institutions like the University of Delhi to elite housing societies, where restrictions on cooking and consumption reflect casteist attitudes. It is pointed out, food plays a critical role in constructing cultural identities, and dominant upper caste food habits are often framed as superior to those of marginalized groups. This cultural policing of food reinforces the social hierarchies that oppress Dalits and northeastern migrants alike. While Indian intellectuals and the state may continue to debate whether Casteism qualifies as racism, the lived experiences of Dalits and other marginalized communities tell a different story. The intersections of caste and race manifest in everyday acts of violence, exclusion, and humiliation. Whether through segregation, impunity, or the policing of food and labour, the caste system in India operates much like a racial regime, dictating who belongs and who does not. Until these systems of exclusion are dismantled, the fight against casteism and racism in India will remain unfinished.